When I was a child, Grandma would sit by the fire, her rocking chair creaking in rhythm with her words. "If you hear a whistle in the dark, you stay quiet," she'd say, her voice low and serious. "Don't whistle. Back, don't follow it. Just stay where you are and wait." I never took her seriously until the night I didn't listen, and I learned what she was trying to protect me from. The fire crackled in the hearth, casting flickering shadows across Grandma's weathered face. I was just a kid then, sitting cross-legged on the threadbare rug, my attention divided between her stories and the embers glowing like tiny stars. Grandma's voice, usually warm and melodic, took on a sharper edge that night, a tone that demanded my full attention. "If you hear a whistle in the dark," she began, her eyes locking onto mine, "don't answer it. Don't whistle. Back. Don't follow it. Just stay quiet, no matter how close it seems." The room felt colder suddenly, the warmth of the fire retreating. I laughed nervously. "Why, Grandma, is it a ghost or something?" Her expression darkened, the lines on her face deepening. "It's not a ghost. It's something worse. Something that doesn't belong here." Her words hung in the air, heavy and foreboding. I wanted to brush it off as another one of her superstitions, like throwing salt over your shoulder or never sweeping after sunset. But the way she gripped her rosary, her knuckles white against the wooden beads, sent a shiver through me. "What happens if you answer it?" I asked, trying to sound braver than I felt. Grandma leaned forward, her voice barely above a whisper. "If you answer it, you'll invite it in. And once it finds you, it doesn't leave." The room seemed to grow darker, the fire sputtering as if even the flames were afraid. Grandma's eyes darted to the window, where the wind howled through the trees like a distant, mournful whistle. She clutched the rosary tighter, her lips moving in silent prayer. I didn't sleep that night. I lay awake, the shadows on the walls dancing like figures, and every faint creak of the house felt like a warning. Grandma's words repeated in my mind, "Don't answer it. Don't follow it." The whistle came just as I was drifting off to sleep. It was faint at first, almost blending with the rustle of the wind through the trees outside Grandma's old house. I sat up, my breath catching in my throat. The room was pitch black, the kind of dark where shadows and shapes blurred together, but the sound was unmistakable, a high-pitched, lilting whistle, like someone calling for attention. I froze, the memory of Grandma's warning rushing back. "Don't answer it. Don't follow it." My pulse quickened, and I strained to hear more. The whistle came again, louder this time and closer. I crept to the window, pushing aside the curtain with trembling fingers. The moon cast long shadows across the yard, the trees swaying in the wind. The path leading into the woods was empty, but the whistle carried through the air, deliberate and taunting. "Hello," I whispered before I could stop myself. My voice sounded small and fragile. The whistling stopped. Silence enveloped the house, so thick it felt suffocating. Then, faintly from the edge of the woods, came the sound of footsteps. Slow, measured, coming closer. My stomach twisted in terror. I realized, too late, I'd answered it. The footsteps stopped, and for a moment, there was nothing but the creak of the old house and the frantic pounding of my heart. Then it came again, the whistle. This time it was impossibly close, just beyond the front door. I gripped the edge of the windowsill, my breath hitching as my gaze darted toward the door. My body screamed to stay put, to stay silent, but my mind raced with questions. What if it was someone in trouble? What if they needed help? The whistle came again, softer now, almost beckoning. I clutched my phone, my fingers trembling as I debated calling someone, anyone. But who could I even explain this to? I heard a whistle outside. They'd think I was crazy. My feet moved on their own, each step creaking under my weight as I made my way to the door. The air grew colder with every inch, a chill that seeped into my bones. I paused, my hand hovering over the lock. "Don't answer it. Don't follow it." Grandma's warning was louder than ever in my mind, but so was the whistle. It was melodic now, almost inviting, a strange tune that wormed its way into my head and pushed reason aside. "Who's there?" I called, my voice shaking. The whistle stopped again, replaced by silence so deep it rang in my ears. Then, from the other side of the door, came a low, rasping voice. "Let me in." The voice, low and rasping, rooted me to the spot. My hand hovered above the lock, shaking as the air grew heavier, pressing against my chest. "Let me in," it repeated, each word drawn out, scraping against the silence like nails on glass. I couldn't move. The room felt impossibly still, the only sound my own ragged breathing. Then the doorknob rattled, softly at first, then violently, as if someone or something was testing it. I stumbled back, my foot catching on the rug, and fell hard onto the floor. The whistle returned, sharper. Now, rising and falling in a haunting melody. It was no longer coming from the door but from everywhere above me, behind me, inside the walls. The front door creaked, its old hinges groaning under some invisible weight. My blood ran cold as it opened slowly, revealing nothing but the yawning darkness beyond. And then I saw it. A figure stepped into the doorway, its outline jagged and wrong, as though it didn't belong in the world I knew. Its head tilted unnaturally, its face hidden in shadow, but I could feel it watching me. The whistle stopped abruptly, and the figure raised a hand, beckoning. My body screamed to run, but I couldn't move. All I could do was stare as it whispered again, "You called me." The figure stepped into the room, its jagged outline flickering like a glitch in reality. The air grew colder, heavy with an oppressive silence that seemed to muffle even my own breathing. It didn't walk, it glided, each movement unnervingly jerky, yet impossibly fast. Finally, my body responded. I scrambled to my feet, my heart hammering in my chest as I bolted toward the back door. The whistle resumed behind me, sharp and shrill, growing louder with each step. It wasn't coming from one direction anymore, it surrounded me, bouncing off the walls and echoing in my head. The shadows seemed alive, stretching unnaturally as I darted through the kitchen. The door was just ahead, but the sound of footsteps followed close behind, impossibly fast. A sudden crash made me glance back, and I immediately regretted it. The figure was right there, its blank face inches from mine, its jagged form flickering in and out of focus. Its hand reached for me, long fingers stretching like tendrils of smoke. I threw the door open and ran into the yard, the cold night air biting my skin. The whistle chased me into the darkness, louder now, more distorted, as if the figure itself was unraveling into sound. I tripped, landing hard in the dirt. When I looked up, the figure was standing at the edge of the trees, its head tilted unnaturally. The whistle stopped abruptly, replaced by a single, guttural word, "Run." And I did. My lungs burned as I ran, the sound of my footsteps pounding against the ground, swallowed by the vast darkness of the woods. The figure didn't follow, not at first. It just stood at the tree line, its jagged form blending with the shadows, its head tilting side to side as though savoring the chase. I didn't stop until I reached the house, slamming the door shut behind me and throwing the locks into place. My chest heaved, the air thick and cold, as though the terror had seeped inside. For a moment, the silence was suffocating, my ears straining for any hint of sound. Then I heard it, the whistle. Faint at first, coming from somewhere deep in the woods. But as I stood, frozen, it grew louder, moving closer, circling the house like a predator. I backed into the kitchen, gripping the edge of the counter for balance. Suddenly, the whistle stopped. The air was still, heavy with anticipation. I turned toward the window, and there it was. The figure stood on the porch, its head pressed against the glass. The surface fogged with each breath it took, the pattern of condensation twisting into shapes that resembled faces, screaming faces. Its hand rose slowly, and it tapped the glass once, twice. Then came the voice, low and guttural, "You can't hide." The lights flickered. The whistle began again, this time inside the house. The whistle echoed through the house, weaving in and out of the shadows like it was alive. My hands trembled as I grabbed a kitchen knife from the counter, the metal cold and useless in my grip. The lights flickered again, plunging the room into brief, suffocating darkness. When they came back on, I wasn't alone. The figure stood at the end of the hallway, its jagged outline sharper now, more defined. It didn't move, but its head tilted again, slowly, as if studying me. My knees buckled, and I stumbled backward, the knife clattering to the floor. The whistle stopped, replaced by a low, guttural voice that seeped into my mind. You called me. I bolted for the living room, slamming the door shut behind me, but it didn't matter. The lights flickered again, and when they steadied, the figure was inside, standing in the center of the room. Its shadow stretched unnaturally long across the walls, flickering like a flame. "Leave me alone," I screamed, my voice cracking. But it didn't flinch. Instead, it took a step forward, its movements jerky and wrong, like a marionette controlled by invisible strings. The whistle returned, louder and sharper, like it was coming from inside my skull. My vision blurred, the walls bending and twisting around me. The figure loomed closer, its blank face filling my view as it whispered, "You can't run. You are mine now." And then, everything went dark. When I woke, the house was eerily quiet, the kind of silence that felt alive, pressing down on me like a weight. My body ached and my mind reeled, grasping for clarity. Had it been a dream? A hallucination? But the faint metallic taste of fear still lingered in my mouth, and the cold air carried the unmistakable echo of the whistle. I sat up slowly, every creak of the old floorboards beneath me making my heart race. The house seemed normal again, or as normal as it could be after what I'd seen. The lights were steady, the shadows no longer twisting unnaturally. But I wasn't alone. On the wall above the mantel, a message was scrawled in long, jagged lines, as though scratched by unseen claws. You called me. My stomach twisted as my eyes locked onto the fireplace. The cold ashes from the night before now glowed faintly, as though some ember still burned deep within. And from the corner of the room, where the figure had stood, the air felt heavy, wrong, like a wound that wouldn't heal. The whistle returned, faint and distant, carried on the wind. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. Was no longer outside. It was here, in me, a part of me now. As I stood paralyzed, the last words of the figure echoed in my mind, "You are mine." And I knew it wasn't over. It never would be. If you ever hear a whistle in the dark, remember this story. Don't answer. Don't follow. Just stay where you are and pray it doesn't find you. When the night is still and the wind carries a faint, melodic whistle, will you stay silent, or will it be too late? The road I take home every night isn't special. It's a winding stretch of asphalt cutting through miles of forest, lit only by the glow of my headlights. But it has one unspoken rule, one that everyone in the area seems to know. If you see someone waving on that road, don't stop. Don't look back. Just keep driving. I never understood why until the night I broke the rule. The first time I heard about the rule, I thought it was a joke, another one of those spooky stories locals pass around to entertain themselves. I was new to the area, fresh from the city, and the idea that a stretch of road could have rules seemed ridiculous. "It's not a joke," my coworker Sarah told me one evening. We were sitting in the break room, the fluorescent lights flickering overhead. "If you see someone waving, keep driving. Don't stop. Don't even slow down." "Why?" I asked, half laughing. "What's going to happen?" She looked at me for a long moment, her face unusually serious. "Just don't break the rule. That's all I'll say." Her words stuck with me, mostly because of the weight in her voice. But I brushed it off as small town superstition. I drove that road every day without incident. Just a long, empty stretch of asphalt cutting through dense forest. Quiet. Lonely. Safe. Or so I thought. It wasn't until weeks later, on a rainy night when the sky was as black as ink, that I began to understand. The road twisted ahead of me, the glare of my headlights bouncing off the slick pavement. That's when I saw a figure standing on the shoulder, arm raised in a slow, deliberate wave. My stomach clenched. The rule came back to me, clear and sharp. But surely this was just a coincidence. Someone needed help, right? I eased off the accelerator, my foot hovering over the brake. Then, as the figure turned to face me, I saw something that made my blood run cold. Their face wasn't right. It wasn't human. The figure's face, or what should have been its face, was wrong. Blurred, featureless, as if someone had smeared wet paint across a canvas. Yet, somehow I felt its eyes on me, sharp and unrelenting. Its arm moved in that same deliberate wave, slow and steady, as if mocking my hesitation. My grip tightened on the wheel. The rain hammered against the windshield, the wipers working overtime, but doing little to clear my vision. I felt trapped in my own car, the dark woods pressing in on either side of the narrow road. Every instinct screamed at me to keep driving, but my foot refused to press the gas. Instead, I stared, my breath catching in my throat. The figure didn't move closer, but the air around it seemed alive, rippling, unnaturally like heat waves in the dead of night. Then it took a step forward. The motion was subtle, almost imperceptible, but it was enough. My paralysis broke. My heart slammed against my ribs as I floored the gas, the car lurching forward. The headlight swallowed the figure in an instant, leaving nothing but empty road behind me. Or so I thought. A glance in the rearview mirror made my stomach drop. The figure wasn't by the shoulder anymore. It was in the middle of the road, waving again. My pulse thundered in my ears as I slammed the pedal. Harder, the edges of the forest blurring into a suffocating tunnel of darkness. The rule wasn't a joke. It wasn't folklore. It was real. The rain pounded harder, drowning out the hum of the engine and the squeak of the wipers. My chest heaved as I clutched the steering wheel, the car hurtling down the dark road. I refused to look back. Again, couldn't risk seeing the figure still waving. My knuckles turned white as the asphalt blurred under the beam of my headlights. Then I heard it. A voice, soft at first, like a whisper carried on the wind, threading through the patter of the rain. I froze, my breath hitching. The words were faint, almost lost in the storm stop. My eyes darted to the rearview mirror out of instinct. Nothing. Just the rain-slicked road disappearing behind me. But the voice came again, louder this time. Why won't you stop? It wasn't coming from the outside. It was inside the car. I whipped my head around, my heart pounding, but the backseat was empty. My chest tightened as the voice grew clearer, sharper, rising above the rain. Please. Stop. My stomach churned as I glanced forward, gripping the wheel so tightly my fingers ached. The road seemed endless, stretching into the void, the trees blurring into an impenetrable wall of black. The voice didn't stop. It wasn't a plea anymore, it was angry. You can't leave me. I screamed as the car jerked, the tires sliding on the wet road. The headlights flickered, and for a split second, I thought I saw someone sitting in the passenger seat. And then the whisper returned, so close it felt like it was inside my ear. You shouldn't have looked. The car swerved violently, my hands gripping the wheel as I fought to stay on the road. My chest heaved. The voice echoing in my ears, you shouldn't have looked. The rain blurred everything outside, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was moving out there, keeping pace with me. I pressed the accelerator harder, the engine roaring as I sped around a curve. My headlights caught the edge of something, a figure standing on the shoulder. My breath caught in my throat. It was them again, their hand raised in that same slow wave. No, I muttered, my voice trembling. This isn't happening. The figure didn't disappear this time. As I approached, they stepped into the road, their movements jerky, wrong, like a puppet being dragged by unseen strings. Their head tilted at an unnatural angle, their face still a featureless blur. I screamed, swerving to avoid them, the tires skidding on the slick pavement. The car spun, the headlights, slicing through the darkness in dizzying arcs. When I finally came to a stop, I was facing the direction I'd come from. The figure was standing in the middle of the road, closer now, their arm outstretched, still waving. I slammed the car into reverse, the engine whining as I tried to escape. But as I looked back, I saw them. Again, impossibly close, standing in the rearview mirror, their hand pressed against the glass from the inside. The whistle began. Low, melodic, and impossible to escape. The whistle grew louder, a haunting, melodic tone that seemed to vibrate in my skull. My foot slammed. The gas pedal, the tires screeching as the car shot forward. The figure disappeared from the rearview mirror, but I knew it wasn't gone. The whistle followed me, threading through the rain, curling into my ears like a living thing. The road twisted ahead, the wet asphalt shimmering under the glare of my headlights. Every turn felt sharper, every tree closer, their gnarled branches clawing at the edges of my vision. The car's engine roared, but it wasn't enough to drown out the sound. The whistle was everywhere, surrounding me, inside me. Then I saw it movement in the trees. A shadow darting between the trunks, keeping pace with the car. My heart pounded as I tightened my grip on the wheel. The shadow flickered closer, impossibly fast until it burst from the woods and into the road ahead. I screamed, swerving hard, the car skidding dangerously close to the ditch. The figure was back, standing in the middle of the road, its arm raised in that slow, deliberate wave. I didn't stop. I didn't even hesitate. The car plowed through the space where it stood, but there was no impact. The figure dissolved into mist, reappearing in my rearview mirror, closer than ever. The whistle shifted, no longer melodic but angry, jagged. A voice hissed through the sound you can't escape. And for the first time, I believed it. The car felt heavier, like something unseen was dragging it down. My hands trembled on the wheel, the whistle echoing in my head, growing louder with every mile. The rearview mirror taunted me, but I couldn't look. I wouldn't look. I didn't need to see it to know it was there. The cold crept in, seeping through the vents and wrapping around me. My breath fogged the windshield, despite the heat blasting from the dashboard. The whistle shifted, now a low, guttural hum, vibrating through the air. It wasn't outside anymore. It was inside. A soft creak broke the rhythm of the engine. My heart stopped. The sound came from the back seat, a subtle shift of weight, leather stretching under pressure. My throat tightened, my mind racing. I fought the urge to glance back, but the mirror betrayed me. For a fleeting second, I saw it. A shadowed figure sitting just behind me, its head tilted at an unnatural angle. My pulse spiked, panic coursing through me as the whistle stopped, replaced by a whisper. "Why are you running?" I screamed, swerving wildly, the car lurching dangerously close to the ditch. When I steadied, the whisper came again, closer, clearer. "You invited me." My chest tightened as I forced my gaze forward, my knuckles white on the wheel. The road stretched endlessly ahead, but I could feel it breathing, watching, waiting. I wasn't driving alone anymore. The whistle stopped abruptly, leaving a vacuum of sound that made my ears ring. The silence was worse, oppressive, alive. I could feel the weight of the figure in the back seat, its presence stretching the air taut, like a rubber band ready to snap. My hands trembled on the wheel as the road ahead warped, the trees seeming to close in tighter, their gnarled branches reaching like skeletal fingers. "You shouldn't have looked," the voice whispered again. But this time, it was accompanied by a soft laugh, low, guttural, and chillingly human. I opened my mouth to scream, to demand what it wanted, but the words lodged in my throat. The truth came unbidden, a realization that crawled through my mind like a venomous snake. The road wasn't normal. It never had been. It wasn't a shortcut or a convenient path. It was a trap, a place that didn't exist, in the way I thought it did. The figure spoke again, its voice twisting with malice. "This road knows you now. It knows all of us." The headlights flickered, and in the brief darkness, I saw them countless figures lining the trees, waving. Their faces were hollow, blurred, just like the one in my backseat. When the lights returned, the road was empty, but the truth remained: I had broken the rule. And the road wouldn't let me leave. Not alone. Not unchanged. The road ended eventually, or at least it seemed to. The trees thinned, the asphalt giving way to gravel, and my car finally rolled to a stop outside my driveway. But the silence clung to me, thick and suffocating. My hands trembled as I shut off the engine, the echo of the whistle still haunting my ears. Inside my house, the air felt wrong, colder than it should have been. Shadows flickered where there was no light, and the mirrors seemed off, their reflections delayed. I locked every door and window, but it didn't help. The weight of the figure's presence still pressed against my chest. Then I saw a faint smear of condensation on the glass of my living room window. It was the outline of a hand. The whistle returned, soft and melodic, drifting from somewhere deep within the house. I wasn't alone. I never would be again. Share this with someone who drives alone at night. But don't be surprised if the whistle follows them home. What if, the next time you're driving alone at night, you see someone waving at you? Will you remember the rule? The rules were posted on a rusted sign near the entrance of the graveyard, half hidden by overgrown weeds. At the time, I thought they were just there for show superstitions scrawled in faded paint to scare off vandals. But now, standing in the middle of this cursed place, surrounded by shadows that breathe and whispers that claw at my ears, I realized the rules weren't a warning. They were a lifeline. The gate creaked as I pushed it open, the sound cutting through the heavy silence of the graveyard. The air was colder here, unnaturally so, biting at my skin despite the mild autumn night. My flashlight flickered, its beam casting long, distorted shadows over the gravestones. I took a hesitant step forward, gravel crunching under my boots. That's when I saw the sign. It was old, the wood splintered and warped, its paint faded and peeling. The letters looked hand-painted, uneven and hurried, but still legible enough under the weak light of my flashlight. The rules were scrawled in bold, red strokes that almost seemed to bleed into the wood. 1. Don't speak the names on the headstones. 2. Don't take anything from the graves. 3. If you hear someone call your name, don't answer. 4. Leave before midnight. I let out a dry laugh, the sound too loud in the oppressive stillness. Rules for a graveyard? It felt like a prank, a ghost story made to scare off anyone who wandered too close. But the further I read, the more uneasy I felt. My flashlight trembled as I scanned the list again, the words somehow feeling heavier now. Leave before midnight, I muttered under my breath. My voice echoed, unnaturally loud. A sudden gust of wind whipped through the trees, rustling the leaves and making me jump. I stepped past the sign, dismissing the creeping fear that clawed at my chest. After all, they were just rules. They didn't mean anything, right? The graveyard stretched endlessly ahead, the headstones leaning at odd angles like crooked teeth. My flashlight flickered as I wandered deeper, the air thick and heavy. The further I went, the quieter it became, as though the world beyond the gates had ceased to exist. I stopped at a headstone covered in moss, its inscription barely visible beneath the growth. Out of idle curiosity, I crouched down and ran my fingers over the engraved letters, clearing away the grime. A name, urged Mary Halstead. I read it aloud without thinking. Mary Halstead, died 1903. The words hung in the air, swallowed by the silence. I stood, brushing the dirt from my hands, but the unease from earlier had deepened. A chill ran down my spine as a faint sound drifted through the graveyard, a whisper, so soft I thought I'd imagined it. Who's there? I called, turning in circles, my flashlight casting frantic beams over the graves. No one answered, But the whisper came again, clearer this time. It wasn't the wind. It was a voice, low and rasping, so close it made my skin crawl. Why did you say my name? Name. My breath caught. I stumbled backward, nearly tripping over a root. The flashlight slipped from my grip, clattering to the ground, its beam rolling wildly across the gravestones. The voice grew louder, the words, overlapping now, as though the very air was speaking. You shouldn't have said my name. Something moved in the shadows behind the headstone. I grabbed the flashlight, my hand trembling as I swung it toward the headstone. The beam flickered, barely holding steady, but the shadows beyond it seemed to ripple as though something unseen moved. Just out of reach. My breath came in shallow gasps, each one clouding in the frigid air. The voice was gone, replaced by an oppressive silence so thick it pressed against my ears. Hello, my voice was barely a whisper, shaky and fragile. The reply came immediately, everywhere at once. Why did you say my name? The voice was low, distorted, like wind dragged through jagged glass. I spun around, the flashlight's beam bouncing wildly across the gravestones. The shadows danced, shifting unnaturally. Another voice joined the first, softer but equally wrong. Do you remember me? My stomach churned as more whispers rose, layering over each other like a dark symphony. They were, coming from every direction, growing louder, more insistent. Some pleaded, others accused, but all of them carried a sharp edge that scraped against my sanity. Why did you come here? You don't belong. You broke the rules. My heart pounded as I stumbled backward, nearly tripping over a protruding root. The headstone seemed closer now, the graveyard tightening around me like a trap. I swung the flashlight in a desperate arc, but it did nothing to push back the darkness. The voices swelled, their words blending into a chorus of pain and anger. I pressed my hands over my ears, but it didn't stop them. They were inside me now, crawling through my mind, demanding answers I didn't have. And then one voice rose above the rest, cold and commanding, run. I didn't wait to be told twice. I turned and bolted into the night, the whispers chasing me like a storm. I ran blindly through the graveyard, the uneven ground catching my feet and nearly sending me sprawling. The voices didn't fade, they grew sharper, louder, their anger twisting around me like a noose. You shouldn't have come, they hissed, overlapping in a relentless cacophony. You broke the rules. My flashlight flickered, its beam sputtering weakly before plunging me into darkness. I cursed, fumbling with it as the whispers grew deafening. Then I saw it, a faint glimmer on the ground just ahead, catching what little light remained. A necklace, its chain broken, lying in the dirt. The rational part of me screamed to leave it, to follow the rules. But something else, the same foolish arrogance that had brought me here, pushed me forward. My hand shot out, gripping the cold metal. Told myself it was a reflex, a fleeting moment of curiosity. But as soon as I lifted it, the air changed. The voices stopped. For a heartbeat, the graveyard was silent. Too silent. The oppressive weight of the whispers lifted, replaced by something worse, stillness so heavy it felt alive. Then the world shifted. The ground beneath my feet seemed to pulse, and the headstones loomed closer, their inscriptions glowing faintly in the dark. A low, guttural moan rose from the earth, vibrating through my bones. My fingers tightened around the necklace as shadows poured from the graves like ink, coalescing into forms that weren't human. You took what wasn't yours, a voice growled, deep and hollow. The shadows moved toward me, their shapes twisting unnaturally. My legs refused to cooperate, rooted in place as the figures closed in. The necklace burned against my skin, its heat searing through my palm, but I couldn't let go. The shadows whispered in unison, you won't leave. I forced my legs to move, stumbling backward as the shadows advanced. My flashlight had long since died, leaving only the faint glow of the necklace to cut through the suffocating darkness. My breaths came in shallow, ragged gasps, each one louder than the unnatural silence around me. Then, from the corner of my eye, I saw it, a shape shifting among the trees. At first, I thought it was another shadow, but this one moved differently. It slithered between the trunks, impossibly tall and thin, its limbs bending at grotesque angles. I froze, my heart hammering as the figure stopped, tilting its head toward me like it was studying me. The whispers returned, faint but insistent, carried on a wind that didn't move the trees. "You broke the rules," they said, overlapping in a haunting chant. "You can't leave." The shadow stepped closer, its form flickering like a dying flame. The glow from the necklace dimmed, as though the object itself was recoiling from whatever this thing was. My grip tightened, the chain biting into my palm as I backed away, my foot catching on a root. I hit the ground hard, the necklace slipping from my grasp. The shadow moved faster now, closing the distance between us. Its face, or what should have been its face, hovered inches from mine, an empty void that seemed to pull the air from my lungs. The whispers turned to a single, guttural growl run. And I did. The wind howled through the trees, its force so sudden it felt alive, pulling at my clothes and pushing me toward the deeper part of the graveyard. My feet pounded the uneven ground, my mind racing with the echo of the shadow's growl run, but no matter how fast I moved, the feeling of being watched pressed against me, like unseen eyes were tracking my every step. Then it came soft and faint at first, but unmistakable. My name, Jason. I froze, my legs locking beneath me. It was my mother's voice. It wasn't possible. She was miles away, home and safe. But the way she called my name, gentle and familiar, rooted me to the spot. "Jason. It's me." The sound came from just ahead, beyond a cluster of leaning headstones. I knew the rule. If you hear someone call your name, don't answer. But the voice sounded so real, so close. My lips moved before I could stop them. "Mom." The graveyard responded instantly. The ground trembled beneath me, the headstones vibrating as the air thickened with whispers. The voice was gone now, replaced by something worse: laughter. Low, guttural laughter that erupted from the shadows. "You broke the third rule," the voices hissed. The laughter grew louder, closer. Shadows poured from the headstones, forming shapes that towered over me, their arms outstretched, reaching. I stumbled back, but the darkness followed, its laughter twisting into a roar. "Now you're ours." The laughter dissolved into a deafening roar, a sound that felt as if it were ripping the air apart. My legs carried me forward, deeper into the graveyard, as if pulled by an unseen force. The shadows didn't just follow, they surrounded me, twisting and warping the space around me until the graves blurred into nothingness. Ahead, the gates appeared, impossibly far yet glowing faintly as though they were my only escape. But the air grew heavier with each step, the cold biting at my skin. The whispers returned, rising like a tide, merging into a single, guttural voice. "Midnight is here." My chest tightened. The rule flashed in my mind: leave before midnight. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I fumbled it out, my fingers trembling, and the screen's glow revealed the time: 12:01 a.m. I screamed, slamming into the gate. It wouldn't budge. The metal seemed fused, cold, and unyielding under my desperate hands. Behind me, the shadows solidified, forming a wall of faceless figures. They stood silently, waiting. A single figure emerged from the crowd, taller and darker than the rest, its head tilted, and though it had no face, I could feel it staring into me. It reached out with one jagged hand, its voice filling my head. "You broke them all. Now you stay." The gates disappeared, the graveyard stretching endlessly around me. The world I knew was gone. I woke up just outside the graveyard, sprawled on the cold, damp grass as the faint light of dawn crept in through the trees. My body ached, and my head throbbed as though it had been squeezed in a vice. For a moment, I thought it had all been a nightmare until I noticed the dirt beneath my nails, the deep scratches on my arms. I scrambled to my feet, looking back at the graveyard. The gate stood ajar, swaying in the breeze, but something was different. The sign with the rules was gone, replaced by a blank, rusted plank. The silence out of the place was deafening. As I turned to leave, a faint whisper brushed against my ear. You can't leave it behind. At home, the whispers followed. The shadows in the corners of my room stretched too far. The mirrors lingered on reflections that weren't mine. The graveyard wasn't just a memory. It was inside me now, and it wasn't done. Day. If you're ever dared to visit a graveyard, remember the rules aren't there for decoration. They're there to save you. Share this story if you dare, but be warned some rules can't be broken twice. What would you do if you heard your name whispered in the dark tonight? Would you answer, or would it already be too late?